Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Perth and Kinross Council Local Review Body meeting of the 8th of March. I'm Councillor Lewis Simpson. I'm the convener of the local review body, and I'm joined today by Councillor David Illingworth and Councillor Bob Braun, who are volunteers from the Development Management Committee. I'm very grateful for them putting their names forward today. I'm also joined by Mr. David Harrison, who is the planning advisor to the LRB. He is not part of the planning department and has had no previous involvement in any of the applications on the agenda today. We're also joined by Mr. Jeff Fogg, the legal advisor to the LRB, and by Mr. Danny Williams of Committee Services. Firstly, can I ask you, colleagues, are there any declarations of interest by members on any item in the agenda today? Councillor Braun.
No, nothing at all, convener.
Councillor Illingworth.
No declarations.
And I have none either. We now move to the minutes. Now, I understand that the minutes of 11th of January, 8th of February are not yet available, and there have been some issues with staff absences which are now resolved, and it's my understanding that these minutes will all come to our next meeting in April. So we'll now move to the business in hand today, and move, if we may, to the first application, which is for the erection of a dwelling house on land 50 metres northwest of Dunaberrig House, Needless Road, Perth. Can I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, convener. As you say, this is a detailed planning application for the erection of a dwelling house at land 50 metres northwest of Dunaberrig House, Needless Road, Perth. The proposal is for a two-storey house extending to some 86 square metres of floor space, with 3 bedrooms upstairs and an open plan living accommodation area on the ground floor. It would be some 7.5 metres in height to the ridge. The overall design is of a contemporary nature, with the rectangular floor plan and a pitched roof form, which presents gables to the front and the rear. Externally, the ground floor would be finished in traditional smooth white render, while the upper level would be completed in standing seam zinc cladding coloured grey. A parking space would be provided off the entry to the front, and a garden area would be provided to the rear. More details of the design and the architectural concept are contained in the applicant's design statement. The site currently comprises an access, hard standing and a substation. I'll just take you through some photographs now, but you might like to have page 83 onwards, which provides you with location plan, site plans and drawings of the proposed house. The general sequence of the photographs will be the new house in Needless Road, which you see in the first photograph here, then the existing path at the side of that house, and then the different elements and uses of the site itself, and then generally housing in Cavendish Avenue. So I say in the first photograph here, we're seeing the frontage of the houses facing onto Needless Road, and amongst the traditional houses you see the new house which has been inserted adjacent to the footpath link. From that, if we move down the street a little bit in the next photograph, we see that footpath link and the new house, and of course we have traditional properties on each side. And as you'll see, this property has been completed in a combination of stone on the ground floor frontage with render above and a slate roof. From there, as it were, if we move up the side of that house, up the footpath as it were, we see the general arrangement between the fencing which is enclosed the footpath of the new house and of course the fencing of the traditional house on the right hand side. So this is us looking at, say, in a northward direction, and at the very end of the footpath, as you see it in this photograph, you'll see the property which is in Cavendish Avenue on the opposite side of the road from the application site. So from there, if we go up the footpath in the next photograph, we get the end to that, we start to enter into where the application site is and the existing access and footpath. We start to pick up on other aspects of the site. So we have the 2 garages referred to in the papers on the right hand side, which serve other properties with the application site. You'll also notice, as I say, the house at the far end, which is opposite the entry to the application site itself. So from there, we move into the application site in the next photograph and swing slightly to the left. This is part of the turning area at the end of the site, next to the back of the new property on Needless Road. And you're just probably also picking up the sidewall of the substation, which is within the application site, or the applicant's ownership, I should say. And if we swing round to the right slightly in the next photograph, we see the corner of the application site, which includes the substation there, and also we're picking up the existing access to that turning area. And if we swing round in the next photograph to the right a little bit, we look down the main body of the application site. You're still picking up the substation on the extreme left-hand side of the photograph and the garages on the extreme right-hand side of the photograph. We swing round a little bit to the right in the next photograph and step back, you see the frontage of the garages. Swinging round again and right to in the next photograph, we catch the footpath coming through from Needless Road, but also we note there's a right of access into the rear garden of that new property on Needless Road. Swinging now to the left of that photograph, we move on and look down the boundary on the eastern side. That's the rear of Cavendish Avenue property. The proposed footpath would, of course, move towards that boundary. We then swing round in the next photograph to the left to see the other side, as it were, and this is the rear of Cavendish Avenue on that western side. From there we move on in the next photograph. This is the property on the opposite side of the road from the proposed house. So if we swing round slightly to the left of that photograph, we look up Cavendish Avenue, I should say, to the variety of single and 1.5 story properties on that side of Cavendish Avenue. And I draw your attention to that because they contrast slightly with other properties in Cavendish Avenue. So if we swing around to the left of that photograph, we see the house immediately on that western boundary. You'll notice there's a difference in levels here. From the road, it slopes up into the application site. And I'm sure you'll also notice that there is a dormer window facing onto the application site on that western side. If we swing round again a little bit to the left, we're looking straight up the application site now, and we can see the back of the new house on Needless Road. And then if we swing round again slightly to the left of that, panning round, we see the property immediately to the east of the application site. And you'll see these are 2-story properties, and you'll also probably notice that there's a window facing onto the application site at first floor level there as well. I don't know for certain, but the style of the window might suggest it's either serving a stair or possibly a bathroom. Swinging round to the left of that again, you look down the eastern side of Cavendish Avenue, and you can see the 2-story properties continue in that direction. So if we move on to the next photograph, this shows you the detail of the frontage where the parking space would be created to serve the proposed house. And from there, if we move back up, as it were, into the application site, we're just taking ourselves back through in the opposite direction now, back to Needless Road. This is the footpath, and we're seeing the rear of the house that's been built on Needless Road. And so you can see there are first floor windows in that property as well. And from there, we step on in the next photograph, just to look in the opposite direction to show you the nature of the footpath looking down onto Needless Road. And if you can move to the next photograph, I'll just leave you with that general photograph of the application site. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, historically the site is seen as a house plot rather than a means of access to the land behind. The applicant bought the site in 2015 from Perth and Kinross Council and considers that the information available to prospective purchasers was inadequate at that time. The expectation that some residents that this is private land that should be available for the benefit of the community as amenity space is seen as unrealistic and is not the legal requirement or position. The planning officer has recognised that the site does not form public open space. The site is used as a means for cutting through between Cavendish Avenue and Needless Road, also as a means of access to two garages and the substation and access and parking for 63A Needless Road. That's the new house. There was an earlier proposal for two houses, one on Cavendish Avenue and one on Needless Road, and that was refused. The subsequent proposal for the house onto Needless Road was granted and provided for a 2-metre wide footpath through the development site. The proposal envisages the renewal of the tarmac surface. That permission, granted by the Development Committee, was seen as an improvement to the previous proposal and was acceptable to the community green space and to transport planning regarding vehicular access and pedestrian considerations. The current proposal is for a house within a well-established sustainable urban location. The gaps between the houses vary between 2 and 6 metres, and this has been affected by the erection of extensions. It is considered that there is no uniformity in spacing or architectural style, external materials, house scales or forms, boundary treatments or parking arrangements in this locality. In this context, the proposal is seen as providing a high-quality contemporary design of simple pitched roof form, gable onto the street, with different ground and first floor wall finishes. The design incorporates PV panels and an air source heat pump, with an emphasis on sustainable living. Regarding siting, the frontage is 7 metres without the access and 10 metres wide, including the access. This is seen as being in keeping with other frontages. The house would enjoy access on both sides and conforms to the frontage building line. Regarding scale, the proposal is seen as a transition between the two adjoining properties, that is, the adjoining 2-storey and 1.5-storey houses respectively. Regarding the placemaking policy concerns, the proposal is seen as meeting all of the criteria. Notably, it makes no significant change to the existing pedestrian or vehicular traffic generation of the site and is seen as improving pedestrian safety regarding improved surfacing, surveillance and more controlled usage. The proposal would move and remove and resurface the 3-metre wide access and path to the eastern boundary. This serves the quarterly maintenance requirement of the substation, the rear parking for 63A Needless Road, and the 2 existing garages at 63 Needless Road. All involved are aware of the shared use of this access, which does not generate significant traffic. The proposal would improve pedestrian safety through greater restriction on those making use of the access. The 6.8-metre distance between the garages and the substation is seen as sufficient for manoeuvring, and the space for parking and access would be the same as at present. The pedestrian path is some 75 metres in length and varies between 2 and 11 metres in space at different sections along its length. This is not seen as being, inverted commas, hemmed in, close inverted commas, and any conflict is expected to be extremely rare due to the low level of usage. Any concerns regarding the height of fencing could be addressed through a planning condition. It is assumed that Transport Planning's reference to a lack of parking has been set aside in the planning officer's assessment. The site has good access to all modes of transport. If required, an additional parking space could be provided. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. Local Development Plan Policy 17 recognises that residential development within settlements can contribute to the supply of housing land. It also recognises the potential conflicts that can arise between new development and the existing built environment. Where infill housing is involved, the density of development needs to use the site efficiently while respecting the environs and improving the character of the area. Scottish Government advice, Designing Streets, identifies the importance of taking movement, including for pedestrians and cyclists, into consideration. The site includes much of the pedestrian route between Needless Road and Cavendish Avenue, part of which was provided for in the development of 63A Needless Road. From the representations received, this is a route valued by local residents. The proposal involves the repositioning of this shared vehicular and pedestrian access between the existing hedge on the eastern boundary and the proposed garden fence of the house plot to enable the house site to be formed. This is viewed as constraining the space for this aspect in comparison to the present arrangement to a degree that would lead to a greater prospect of conflict between pedestrians and vehicles accessing the parking to the rear. The present option for pedestrians to step off the tarmac and into the verge would be removed in this proposal. This matter was identified as a reason for refusal in the earlier planning application, and the proposal is seen as being in conflict of Policy 15 of the Local Plan. Regarding Local Development Plan 2 Policies 1A and 1B concerning placemaking, these set out in broad terms that the design and scale of development should respect its surroundings. This reflects supplementary guidance that establishes the importance of good design in the public interest. Cavendish Avenue is seen as having a steady rhythm of detached and semi-detached houses. By comparison, the site has a very narrow frontage and would be of a high density in relation to many other detached houses which form the streetscape of Cavendish Avenue. Similarly, the bulk and massing of the proposed house is viewed as being significantly greater than neighbouring properties. Taken together, the proposal is viewed as an overdevelopment of the site to the extent that it is contrary to Local Development Plan Policies 1A, B and 17. Privacy and overlooking concerns have been expressed by some residents. The high-level strip window on the east and west side elevations are considered to be acceptable. The south-facing windows are also seen as acceptable due to the intervening distance to the house on Needless Road. Considering the removal of lockups and the limited number of existing vehicles entitled to gain access, the repositioning of the entry and access next to 48 Cavendish Avenue is not seen as meriting the refusal of the proposal in itself. Regarding potential overshadowing, the proposal has been assessed against the Council's supplementary guidance as affecting the garden grounds of the properties on each side, but not to an extent that would warrant the refusal of the application. It also meets the Council supplementary guidance for sufficient private rear amenity garden space. Transport planning has concerns regarding the restriction of visibility towards the substation where pedestrians and vehicles may meet. A swept path analysis has not been requested due to other more fundamental concerns in relation to the principle of development. A second parking space is seen as necessary for a house with this level of accommodation. The proposal is not viewed as eroding the landscape qualities of the locality in terms of the loss of this small area of grass adjacent to the shared access. It does not raise any drainage or flooding concerns. Turning to representations in summary, the following main points were raised in the 11 representations received. Concern regarding the loss of pedestrian access between Cavendish Avenue and Needless Road, adverse effect on the visual amenity through the loss of open space, the excessive height and housing density of the proposal, a lack of car parking, concerns regarding light and noise pollution, the loss of daylight and sunlight and overlooking, the impact on the character of the area, road safety concerns and the potential conflict between pedestrians and vehicles, and the proposal being contrary to the local development plan. In this case, there has been a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Illingworth.
I have no questions.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Broughton?
No, none from me either, Convener.
I have a couple, Mr. Harrison. Firstly, regarding this particular photograph is very helpful. I noticed that the edge of this, the grass there, there's some utility boxes of some kind, and I think that's a Royal Mail post box and a lamppost. I take it they all remain in the proposed parking space would be immediately behind them. Is that correct? Yeah, I think you're still on mute, Mr. Harrison.
Yes, it's a little unclear. The lamppost appears to be actually out with the application site. Technically, I think it is actually in the pavement, as is what appears to be some sort of junction box of some sort on the left-hand side of the photograph there. The mailbox might be in the application site, so you're really down to almost how clearly defined the edge of the application site and the edge of the footpath is there. Usually you find these utilities are in the public space rather than in private land, but I'm aware that, of course, the land was previously owned by the council, so it may have been accommodated by the council in the past. So I'm slightly vague about that, but I would suggest that's really it may be a civil matter, but it may not be. But you're correct. The proposed parking space is in front of the proposed house, just immediately behind that.
And the proposal is for one. The suggestion was that they might be able to accommodate another one. Would that be beside the proposed one?
I think you'll probably find there wouldn't be space there. I think the suggestion is it might be provided in the rear garden area. You would note that the house on Needless Road, as I mentioned, I think earlier, does have an ability for the access there for a vehicle if required.
Thank you. And there was mention made about how busy this path is. I take it we have no information as to the use of this path, Mr. Harrison, have we?
No, there's no technical information. I suspect it may be different at different times of day, possibly when children are coming to and from school, it may be busier than other times when there's really effectively no use.
Well, certainly that was my experience. I've been there a couple of times recently. Once I realised was at sort of school closing time, and it seemed to be extremely busy. And it was back on another occasion where, again, there were a number of people using it, but not quite so busy. All right, I have no further questions, Mr. Harrison. So if my colleagues are content, members, we can proceed to determine this application for review on the basis of information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth.
I require no more information.
Councillor Braun.
None for me either, convener.
Right. Well, I too, I'm happy to proceed. So we will now assess the case and move to debate. So, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Girls Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start things off, colleagues. As I say, I know this area reasonably well, and when this application first came before me, I couldn't quite work out where this house was going to go. And having visited the site, I was really still perhaps surprised, I think, that there was a proposal to actually put a house in here. It's a fairly busy area with car access, with pedestrian access, and it strikes me that it's a very narrow and constrained site. And on this occasion, I think I would be minded to agree with the officers and uphold the reasons for refusal. I might want to do a little bit of tidying up, colleagues, but I think that said, I feel this is a constrained site, and I feel it would be it would not enhance the area at all, and perhaps constrain and deter people from using it as a pathway. So I think I'm fairly clear, colleagues, on this occasion that I would be prepared to uphold all four reasons for refusal. Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view?
Yeah, thank you. I'm inclined to disagree with the officers in this case. I think this site is a wasted site. It's an empty site. It has no real value to the community apart from as a passing place between Needless Road and Cavendish Avenue. The site, although it is a bit of a squeeze, is not any more of a squeeze than the semi-detached house right next door to it. The house is quirky and contemporary, and in terms of access to the substation and the garages behind, I think there is just enough access to allow the occasional use of vehicles along that small lane and the occasional use by pedestrians. In terms of parking on the house itself, there is one parking space, but having been up and down Cavendish Avenue several times over the last couple of years, there is plenty of parking to the uphill side of the site. So I am inclined to disagree with the officers in this case.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Thank you for your view. Councillor Braun, may we have your view?
Thank you, convener. In some ways, I do agree with Councillor Illingworth a little, in as much that the site itself looking at the photograph, looks untidy, and could do with some work on it, I think. But I have to agree with you, convener, that I don't think this is a suitable site for a house. Much has been made about the variation of styles along Cavendish Road, and there is obviously a variety, but they are all traditional build. And this is not. And looking at the artist's impression, which I've got in front of me, I feel this just would not. I don't want to say it stick out like a sore thumb, because that's probably unfair, but it would stick out, and I think it's not a suitable style for this road. And I presume it cannot be a traditional style because of the narrowness of the plot. And you get the impression a little bit, looking at the photographs, that this seems to have been shoehorned into to try and get a building in there. So my view is that yeah, this is not a suitable property to build here, and I'm going to deny the appeal on this occasion and concur with you, convener. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Braun. So there you have it, Mr. Fogg. I think 2-1 democracy in action. We've all given our views. If I might just say that I'm content with reason 1, I would just, I think, finish in the second last line. I would put a full stop after density and start a further sentence where it says as, if we may. I think also in reason 2, in the last line, I think we should say delete the word within and replace it with through. I think that would be more appropriate. In reason 3, should I say, sorry, I think I would delete in the second line the word create, and perhaps put in something like allow for, because there's already the access at the moment. And in item 4, I think whilst I agree with the reasoning, I don't like the word throttling. I think we should remove, or not in this instance anyway, I think we should remove that and put words to the effect of the reduction in the space available. I think that's a more appropriate way of describing the situation there. So if I can check first of all that my colleagues agree that that is a reason, or certainly Councillor Braun agrees that that is a reasonable tidying up exercise.
I'm happy with that, convener. Yes, I think it's clear.
You disagree, Councillor, I see you nodding, so I agree with that. Are you happy, Mr. Fogg and Mr. Harrison? You have everything you require for this one?
Yes, thank you, convener. Thank you.
Yes, I am, convener.
Thank you, Doug. So, to the applicant, as you can see, we've given this a thorough examination. We've been to the site, and on this occasion, by 2 to 1, we have agreed to uphold the views of the council officers and to refuse this application. Right, colleagues, we move to the next item on the agenda, item 2, which is a change of use from open space to form extension to garden ground and erection of a fence at 10 Almond Grove Hunting Tower Field, Perth. May I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the change of use of open space to form an extension to garden ground and erection of a fence at 10 Almond Grove Hunting Tower Field. This triangular area of land lies to the rear of 10 Almond Grove and is bounded by a footpath on the eastern side and the National Cycle Route 77 on the northern side. It is an area of amenity open space serving this housing development, which the applicant, who now owns the land, wishes to enclose with a 2-metre high timber fence and enclose it to form additional garden ground. I'll just take you through to the photographs now, but you might like to have page 199 available, which provides you with the location plan, the site plan. The general sequence of the photographs will be approaching the ground from the Almond Grove side, the footpath, its junction with the National Cycleway, and the site as seen from the cycleway. So I say in the first photograph here we have 10 Almond Grove identified and the front garden parking area of that. The footpath, of course, runs down the, shall we say, the right-hand side of the building as we see it here. So if we just move to the next photograph, this is us looking down that side of the property. The red line, of course, enclosing the applicant's ground as it stands at the moment. So we have the surface of the footpath there, and on one side we have a hedge enclosing the other property. You can see in this photograph, we move down the path a bit to the next photograph. You can see the landscaping on both sides, but we're starting to pick up the new fence which has been erected enclosing the garden, the previous open space area. Again, an area which was previously open space but is now have been taken into garden ground. We move further up the path again in the next photograph. We're starting to see the area which the applicant wishes to enclose as shown in the red line here. And if we move again in the next photograph up a little bit further, this is us moving towards the route of the National Cycle, Route 77. And from that position where we have the footpath enclosed on one side and the openness on the other, we swing round to the left in the next photograph. And we look across the main part of the application site, and we pick up the fence of the adjoining property. Moving on further up in the next photograph, we move to the junction with the National Cycle route, and you'll notice there that at this junction, on the one side you have, on the right hand side you have the new fence. Beyond that, has been attached to the fence is a mirror which allows a certain amount of visibility between people and, well, cyclists or pedestrians meeting at that junction. If we move on in the next photograph, we move into the cycle route, as it were, and we're looking down the recently erected fence adjacent to the cycle route on the northern side of that junction. And there's also a certain amount of lighting has been provided by residents, not by the public authority, to the footpath at that point. And if we move on to the next photograph, you'll see a detail of that lighting. And if we move on to the next photograph, we're stepping back a little bit from the junction, and you can see the basically where the application site comes to at that point. And then if we move to the next photograph, we look back down the footpath that we've just come up in the previous photographs, and that maybe most clearly shows the linking footpath to Almond Place. That's where the, shall we say, the more brown fencing meets the greener fencing. So there's a junction there. And then we're looking at the fencing at the back of number 10 as it stands at the moment. And then swinging round to the right in the next photograph, we look across the main body of the site, which is to be proposed as additional garden ground. And then swinging round again to the right in the next photograph, we catch the boundary with the footpath, the cycle path I should say, and you'll note there are a number of trees in that open space area, which would then be enclosed as part of the garden ground of the number 10. Moving on to the next photograph, we move into the cycle route, again showing you that northern boundary and the trees and the other housing beyond. And from there, if we go up the cycle route, in the next photograph, we turn round and look back down. So this shows you the boundary on that side, and of course the enclosure beyond we've seen in earlier photographs. So from there, as it were, we move back down the cycle route and look across the area proposed to be enclosed towards the junction with Almond Place. And then if we go to the next photograph, thank you, we just swing round and you see the remainder of that corner. We move to the next photograph. We look down that new boundary, as it were, and its relationship with the existing boundary of number 10. And I think that may be the last photograph. Yes, thank you. So if I can leave you with the previous photograph, that will give you some impression of the development relative to the open space. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the pre-application reply from the council indicated that this modest proposal would not raise any significant issues and would not substantially alter residential amenity, the amenity of the core path, or the character and appearance of the area when viewed against Local Development Plan Policies 1A and B and Policy 17. The reply also recognised that the path is bounded by another fence serving rear gardens of other properties. The two reasons for refusal directly contradict this view. The pre-application inquiry informed the applicant's decision to purchase the land from the Greenbelt Company. The pre-application response has been provided in full on page 180 onwards. This housing estate has a number of corridors, the majority of which do not have any lighting. It is noted that residents have installed solar-powered lights on recently erected fences. High timber fences are common throughout the development. The land in question has not been maintained, is fouled by dogs and been subject to dumping of garden refuse. The planting of an orchard and enhancement of the biodiversity of the land is envisaged as a consequence of the proposal. Regarding safety, the applicant is not aware of any accidents between cyclists and pedestrians, and the markings on the path are clear for all the users to act upon with common sense. It is understood that the fence associated with 3 Ammon Place may be being lowered at the corner to improve visibility between the path and the cycle route. Turning to the officer's report of handling, a similar application for the change of use of open space into garden ground at 3 Ammon Place was recently refused as being contrary to policies 1A, 1B, 15, 17 and 39 of the Local Development Plan. This decision, just to update you, has been upheld by the local review body. A proposal for change of use of open space to garden ground is also under consideration at 8 Ammon Grove. And just to update members, this application has now been refused and the local review body has upheld that decision. Approval has been granted for the change of use of a smaller area of open space to extend the garden ground at 4 Ammon Place. In that instance, consent was granted due to its limited size and the limited impact on footpaths and the cycle routes. The pre-application inquiry responses was a desktop exercise. The officer's site visit and the matters identified in representations from third parties have raised a number of concerns that were not addressed in the planning that have not been addressed in the planning application submission. The land use issue concerns whether this amenity open space should be incorporated into the garden of 10 Ammon Grove, or whether it should be retained as amenities land for the wider benefit of the public. The ground is part of the amenity open space associated with this housing estate and the wider footpath network linking to the national cycle route, a well-used resource linking Ammonbank with Perth. The proposed high fence, in combination with other fences, contributes to the hemming in and creation of kinks and blind spots on the footpaths. The pre-application response recommended the setting back of fencing, but this approach has not been adopted. The restricting of visibility at the junction of the paths at the northwest corner is of particular concern, as this reduces safety for pedestrians and cyclists. The proposed fencing is seen as creating a corridor with kinks and blind spots and no intervisibility at the junctions. It also reduces safety for the pedestrians and cyclists, thereby being contrary to policy 15 regarding public access. Regarding policy 1A, placemaking, the proposal is not seen as contributing positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment, and regarding criteria A of policy 1B, placemaking, it is seen as eroding the existing coherent street space and building structure of the housing estate. As it stands, the proposal conflicts with policy 14A and policy 417 residential areas, which seek to retain public open space where it is of recreational and amenity value. The submitted plans make no reference to the existing trees adjacent to the national cycle route, and there is concern that these may be adversely affected by the erection of the proposed fencing. It also reduces the attractiveness of the footpaths, enclosing the entire length of the path from Almond Grove to the national cycle route, and thereby viewed as eroding their local distinctiveness, contrary to criteria A of policy 39 landscape. While this proposal was refused, the officer considered that there may be scope for some of the land to become garden ground, along with the repositioning and reduction in the height of the fencing to provide intervisibility at the junction of the footpaths. It is advised that this would need to be the subject of a revised planning application, which should include details of a new open space planning plan reflecting the Council's supplementary guidance on open space provision. In addition, while each application requires to be determined on its merits, the proposal is seen as having broader harm and, if approved, may be cited as a precedent for the enclosure of other open space, resulting in a cumulative detrimental impact on the visual amenity and also a detrimental impact on public access. Turning now to representations, there were 6 representations received, all of which objected to the application, mainly concerning the proposal being contrary to the local development plan, the excessive height of the fencing, the inappropriate land use and loss of open space and trees, the impact on the safety of users of the paths and the cycleway, and the adverse effect on the visual amenity and character of this area. In this case, there has been a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Can I ask you, colleagues, have you any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Illingworth.
I have no questions, thank you.
Councillor Braun.
Just one, Convener. On the picture we've got in front of us, there's the brown fence that we can see, which we saw in other pictures around that property. Has that been given approval? Presumably, I presume it has got approval to be erected, that fence. Do we know?
The first question would actually be, would it require consent? Parts of it, I suspect, are so far from a public road, unless the cycleway is deemed to be a public road, it may or may not require consent. I suspect it may well be part of the original design for the estate. Right. Quite a few of the other properties have fencing, shall we say, of a similar era. It is certainly, I would suggest, been there long enough to be exempt from any sort of enforcement action, if that's what you're wondering.
I'm just assuming then there was no, they haven't taken any open space into their land, as far as we know. No.
My understanding is the shall we say, the green fence you're looking at is the original fence defining the plot.
And what about the brown fence that was to the left of that? Is that the same situation, I presume? The
brown fence encloses land which was originally in open space and is, my understanding, may be the subject of other applications to enclose it formally.
Right, I'm with you. So that's subject to another application, possibly.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. Mr. Harrison, I've been to this estate 2 or 3 times looking at matters similar to this, and my question relates to all the pieces of open space in this development. I take it consent for these houses when they were built was predicated upon the provision of public open space at the time. Am I right in thinking that?
That would be a reasonable expectation. I wasn't, of course, involved in any of the applications, but the estate certainly seems to have been designed to include areas of open space, and the reference to the Greenbelt Company would suggest that there was an expectation that these would be maintained by the company as part of that sort of mechanism of space being provided and looked after as part of the overall development.
Right, and in your view, are these areas of amenity space within this estate, are they maintained to any extent by the Greenbelt or others?
The photograph would suggest maintenance is of a fairly minimal level.
Right, and in terms of the neighbours acquiring these parcels of amenity land, do they go to an auction, or are they for sale? Are they promoted by the Greenbelt or whoever else it is that owns them at the moment? Do we know?
I think it's something that is fairly, should we say, is happening with increasing frequency, I might say, over recent years, where the Greenbelt Company has, for reasons best known to itself, been either unable to continue to maintain areas of open space which they originally adopted, and have also possibly been approached by adjoining owners to shall we say, to be taken in as additional areas of garden ground, possibly because they've not been, shall we say, as well maintained as the owners might have liked, in terms of being, shall we say, living next to such spaces. That's my general understanding of the background, but certainly it's not uncommon to find these areas being either auctioned or made available for sale one way or another, if they're approached by residents.
Right, thank you, Mr. Harrison. I have no further questions. If colleagues are happy, can we proceed to make a preliminary decision, members? Can we proceed to determine this application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth.
I require no more information.
Councillor Braun.
Happy to proceed, Convener.
Right. I too am happy to proceed, colleagues, so we will assess the case, move to debate. So can I ask you, Councillor Illingworth, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perthing and Ross local development plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
I'm happy to agree with the officer's position on this. I think this would set a precedent for other owners in the estate removing open space, which is an amenity to everyone and to people who use the cycle network path. So I'm happy to agree with the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Braun, may we have your view?
Yep, thank you, Convener. Yeah, we've had a similar case like this before from this area, and it harks back to that. I think that yes, the applicants want to do the right thing and they want to try and tidy up the area, but it is an open space and was designed to be an open space for the development, and I think to fence it off would be to lose that. There's a fine balance here, I think, to maintain the space in a better condition, which I think the applicants want to do. But also to retain that open space feel. And my thoughts go back to the previous application. We said that really and truly the applicants of all these, and there are more I think around, should get together with a planning officer and try to come to some mutually agreed way of proceeding with this to sort things out. In this instance, I'm going to agree with the officers and deny the appeal for the reasons that have been stated. But again, I think it's one of these cases where the intentions are right, but it just needs to get that balance right. And I think the best way forward is for the various parties to get together with a planning officer and come up with a mutually agreed plan. So in this instance, as I say, I'm denying the appeal. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Braun. I think when it comes to these cases, colleagues, I have a huge degree of sympathy with the applicant and the neighbours, who have to put up with the maintenance standards, or should I say lack of maintenance standards, that many of these factoring companies have. My industry over the last 20 years has been full of complaints about this sort of thing, and I know my daughter lives in an area which is maintained, or should or not maintained, by one of these people, and I think it's a big problem. And I can understand why people might want to take these areas into their own ownership and to look after them. However, when it comes to fencing it off with 2 metre fencing and hemming in the paths and so on, that is a different thing altogether. And I would agree with you, Councillor Braun, that perhaps a policy with that all the neighbours could adopt would be the best way forward. But I'm aware I'm straying out with the bounds of what we're allowed to do in the local review body, because we are considering this one particular case. And on this occasion, unanimity reigns, and I agree with both my colleagues. The reasons for refusal are clear. As far as I'm concerned, I feel that this amenity space was designated amenity space for a reason and should remain that way. And I'm also conscious of setting a precedent. So I'm happy to agree with the officers on this occasion, and to agree with the first 4 reasons for refusal, certainly. But I think, Councillor Illingworth, if you'd like to articulate your view first, we can see if we're all in agreement.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest a few tidying up of the wording of the reasons for refusal, if that's okay. Number 1 is line 5. Of the first reason for refusal, I'd like to put a full stop after landscape and delete, sorry, full stop after landscape planting and delete the words biodiversity resource, and then start a new sentence. It fails to provide appropriate intervisibility. Another change I'd like to make is to, I wonder if Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fogg could tidy up the rest of the wording of the third change I'd like to make is says there in paragraph 3, there says there is no intervisibility at junction locations. I'd like to change that to there is severely limited intervisibility. And the 4th change I'd like to make to paragraph 4 on the last line of that, it says in part, in brackets, can we remove that, so bracketed words, and I'd like to see the deletion of paragraph 5, if that's possible.
I think I'm happy with all that, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Braun, are you content with that?
I'm indeed. I don't see any reason not to. That's fine.
Right. So I just check, Mr. Fogg, Mr. Harrison, you everything you require for that?
Convener and Councillor Illingworth, I was clear on the changes which were being requested in connection with the reasons 1, 3, 4, and also the deletion of the 5th reason for refusal. And could I ask for a little bit more specification from Councillor Illingworth as to what he was seeking in relation to the 2nd reason for refusal? I just didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, okay.
Or some direction.
Many apologies. I've scribbled down some notes in that they're not clear to myself. Mr. Harrison, are you able to help?
If I was to looking at the reason, is referring to placemaking and the issue of, as it arose, the previous coherent streets, structure of streets, spaces and buildings. I can only, I'm trying to read between the lines here a little bit, thinking of what the officer was saying. I think he was looking at, shall we say, the whole issue of the estate and the role of footpaths in that context. So it may be a question of the safety aspect that she seemed to focus on in particular, and the concern for intervisibility. So if I'm reading between the lines of what the officer was saying, who he seemed to be, I say, supportive of their view, their principal concern seemed to be to do with the provision of safe use of these footpaths as part of the original layout in terms of the streets and spaces. I could certainly, I'm happy to come up with some wording to that effect on your behalf, if that's what, just to amplify that that reason, if that's what you're seeking.
I'm very happy with that.
Right, so it's something to reflect that, just to amplify. Thank you.
Yes, please.
I think, Mr. Ashby, we all made a similar sort of point in our remarks, and that's what we would like to encapsulate. We can delegate that to you, I think. So I realise that, Mr. Fogg.
Yes, I'm grateful for that clarification from both.
Right, that's fine. Well, to the applicants, I realise is not the answer they were seeking, but I think there's a broader aspect to the retention of these areas of amenity space, and perhaps an opportunity to look at how to deal with them differently. So thank you. We'll now move on to the next application, application 3, which is the erection of a dwelling house in principle on land 80 metres northeast of Broomhill Farm Cottage for Teviot. Mr. Harrison, may I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Yes, thank you, convener. As you say, it's a planning application in principle for the erection of a dwelling house at land 80 metres northeast of Broomhill Farm Cottage for Teviot. The site itself extends to some 0.35 hectares and is currently a field used for grazing, as far as I can tell. But I'll maybe take you straight to the photographs, but you might like to have page 269 available, provide your location plan and site plan. As you see in the first photograph here, this is as it were, a long view of the site from Cairney Brae to the north. The general sequence of the photographs after that will be the existing building group approaching from the west. Now that's just looking at this photograph, that's from the, shall we say, the right hand side of the photograph. We'll go through the building group you're mainly seeing there, and then the site itself, and then the house to the east, that's Burnfield, and again in this photograph that's the white house on the left hand side of the photograph, and then we'll look at the recent conversion of the house, the building to form a house on the northern side of the application site, which I think you can probably pick out in the photograph here as well. But from this position, I say an elevated position, just to give you a context of the overall landscape context, as well as the individual house and the building group that is referred to in the report of handling. You can maybe move on from there, let's say, to the western end of that building group. So this is us approaching, say, from the Dunning side, as it were, going over the Weeburn and coming up the slope towards the Broomhill group itself. So from that position, as we approach, you can see there's development on both sides of the road, and in the centre we have the roof of a cottage as well. So if we go up the road and slightly to the right hand side, we see the house currently under construction on the south side of the public road. And then if we swing to the left of that, we have the farm buildings, as it were, on the north side of the road, where most of the development is at Broomhill. From there we go up the slope, as it were, again going further up the road. So this is Gateside of Broomhill Cottage, obviously a substantial two-storey building. Swinging round to the right of that, we have on the opposite side of the road Gateside Cottage. You can maybe see the roofs of the house under construction beyond that as well. And then we'll basically progress down the row of buildings forming the building group from this point onwards towards the application site. So if we go around to the left in the next photograph. Thank you. We're now looking down the road which the various properties front onto, as it were. So this is us looking in an easterly direction. The application site is not actually visible from here. It's, shall we say, beyond slightly or at and beyond the furthermost point you see, although you might just be able to make out the little white spot, which I understand is the gable of Burnfoot, the far distance. So from that position, if we go up the road a little bit, we're looking across I understand it's a paddock in some way associated or possibly beside the two-storey house that we saw, Gateside of Broomhill Cottage. This is looking across the road in a northerly direction. And if we move on to the next photograph, we look back to that paddock and the side of Gateside of Broomhill Cottage. This is looking back in a westerly direction. So we'll swing round from there, round towards the right slightly, and you'll see there's effectively another area of space, possibly a paddock, between the road and the house known as Dramerne. And from there, in the next photograph, swinging around again to the right, we look past that hedge fronting onto Dramerne, again looking a little bit further down towards the application site. From there, if we move down the road a little bit towards that access you see there, we look back to Dramerne. And so we see the space in front of it between the house and the road, and then swinging slightly to the right. You'll see this is a shared access, and it's an access also into Broomhill Farm, the various buildings at the back. Behind the cottage we'll see in the next photograph. You can just possibly make out through the hedge there. So if we move to the next photograph, we get the cottage I just mentioned, which I think is Ochil View Cottage on the drawings. And you'll see there's another cottage, or you see the top of the gable of another cottage beyond that. And we're just beginning to pick up a fairly substantial tree, which might help to orientate you. It's a large monkey puzzle tree between those two cottages, which is in the grounds of Broomhill itself. We'll see that in later photographs. So from there, if we move up the road a little bit to the frontage of the next cottage, we have it there. So this is the cottage lying to the east of Ochil View Cottage. And from there again, if we move up the road a little bit in the next photograph, we move to the property Broomhill. You can pick up the large monkey puzzle tree there as well next to that property. And we move to the next photograph again a little bit further up the road. We look up the driveway of Broomhill. And there, if we swing round slightly to the right of that photograph, we now begin to pick up the application site itself, which of course has a boundary with Broomhill. And then beyond the application site, we've got Burnfield itself. So there, if we move up the road a little bit in the next photograph, we start to look back towards the various trees enclosing the garden ground of Broomhill. And there, from this point onwards, we look across the frontage of the site and we swing slightly towards the right. So if we move to the next photograph, we get the rest of Broomhill and the monkey puzzle tree I've mentioned. And then behind that, the conversion of a former agricultural building, as I understand it, which was also extended and enlarged, which lies to the rear of the application site. So from there, if we swing, so that's the end of the building group, which is referred to in the papers. So from there, if we swing to the right, we look across the main body of the application site. This is where the central area of the application site. We're still seeing the conversion on the extreme left-hand side of that. And you'll see there's a hedge has been formed along that northern boundary of the application site. Again, we'll see that in more detail later. And then from there, we swing round again to the right. The next photograph, we catch the eastern end of the application site and the birch trees that run along the burn. We swing round again to the right in the next photograph. We look down past that corner of the application site, across the wee bridge over the burn towards Burnfield. This is us looking in an easterly direction now. And from there, if we swing round again, same position in the right to right in the next photograph. This is looking across the farmland on the opposite side of the road. That's the southern side of the road from the application site, looking across the open farmland towards the hills beyond. So from there, if we move down the road, again swinging to the left in this instance, in the next photograph, we see Broom Hill Burn itself and that boundary of the application site. The boundary may in fact be the burn itself, but I've just shown it indicatively as the fence line there. And from there, if we move on from there, swing slightly to the right, we step back a little bit. We have the bridge parapet, and we're looking across the application site towards Broom Hill. And from that position, if we swing slightly to the right, we're still getting that boundary in the application site, but you're seeing the entry into the shall we say, part of Broom Hill itself on that western side of that property. So from there, if we swing round again a little bit to the right in the next photograph, we look into that western entry into Broom Hill, which appears to serve some, shall we say, ancillary buildings. As part of that.
Sorry, Mr. Harrison, interrupt. I think we're talking about Burnfield, I think, here.
Burnfield, sorry.
Clear. Sorry, I was getting a bit confused in the map there. I see from the photographs, but I think it's Burnfield rather than Broom Hill.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Beg your pardon. Burnfield, the ancillary building, you can see beyond the hedge there. And then swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we look past that entry to the, shall we say, the independent house with its own garage and some ancillary building as well. And that's Burnfield. And then from that position, if we go right down the road and turn round, we get a view coming back. So the curtilage of Burnfield extends quite significantly towards the east. So this is us looking back to Burnfield. And towards beyond that, where you see the cars, is where the application, or the furthest car is more or less where the application site is. So from there, if we step back up the road again towards the site, we'll go and have a look at the conversion. This was to the rear of Broomfield, which is referred to in the papers. If you look at document 2, then that is the shall we say, the planning application identified in that. What I draw to your attention here is the boundary of the fence. And if we move to the next photograph, and if you have the opportunity to look at page number 249, it's maybe something I should draw to your attention in this photograph and the next photograph. What you'll note on page 249, that's document 2, the applicant submitted, it implies that the application site extends really across the field to the burn. I'm aware that the planning application site was more in line with the fence line you see here, and doesn't, shall we say, enclose that northern side of the application site. And if we go to the next photograph, you'll see, well, first of all, you'll see the Lelandii hedge that I mentioned, which encloses that northern boundary, but you'll also see towards the left-hand side of that photograph the intervening field between the conversion and the burn, which is, shall we say, the slightly yellow line in the middle distance there. So it would appear that, I say on page 249, the impression is given that the whole of that area is part of the garden ground of the conversion, but on the site it wouldn't appear to be the garden ground, and in the planning application it didn't include that as the garden ground. So you're just picking up, of course, in our far distance on the right-hand side of the photograph here, we're seeing Burn Field, and this, of course, is taken from the corner of the application site. That's the extreme north western side of the application site. So a number of photographs looking across the application site from that corner now. So if we go to the next photograph, we look across the main body of the application site towards Burn Field. And if we swing round a little bit further in the next photograph, we look across the remainder of the application site. I say from the northwest corner, we're looking across, as it were, beyond the application site to the open farmland. We're just getting the boundary of Broom Hill. And so if we go to the next photograph, we pick up the rear of Broom Hill and, of course, the monkey puzzle tree as well. So if we can go to the last photograph, I think. I'll just leave you with that general photograph of the application site. Turning first of all, in summary, to the applicant's case, a new house lies to the northwest, Burn Field. Broom Hill Burn lies to the northeast. The public road lies to the east, and Broom Hill farmhouse to the south. Gateside of Broom Hill and Broom Hill Farm are the most established buildings in this locality. The proposal is seen as qualifying as an infill development with a comparable plot size and plot ratio with adjoining houses. It has a public road frontage and would occupy the full extent of the gap. The site is seen as identifiable and capable of accommodating a house without adversely affecting existing residential amenity or forming skyline development or ribbon development. It is noted that the Council's supplementary guidance has an illustration showing infill development of 5 houses in a continuous line as an acceptable form of development. This is seen as contradicting the guidance text where 5 or more houses in a continuous line are viewed as unacceptable ribbon development. More recent developments at this location have created a linear and random pattern of development between the original farms. It is considered that there is no clear building line. There is also a mix of house types and positions with some backland development and shared accesses. In that context, the existing houses are not viewed as taking the form of a continuous line of houses served by individual accesses and do not fall within the definition of ribbon development, despite the evident characteristic linear pattern of the development. Consequently, the proposal is not considered to be capable of being or forming ribbon development. It is recognised that there is a mix of house types and plot sizes in the locality. It is noted that a house has also recently been erected at the opposite side, on the opposite side of the public road. This house was approved by the local review body and has less containment in the landscape and a larger plot size than the application site. The plot to the north has a similar plot size. While this is an in-principle planning application, the development of a suitably designed house on this site is seen as being undertaken without detrimental impact on the character of the existing housing or the wider landscape. In conclusion, the proposal is seen as complying with Policy 19 and the associated Housing in the Countryside guidance. Turning now to the Officer's Report of Handling in summary, the proposal falls to be assessed against Local Development Plan Policy 19 and the associated supplementary guidance regarding housing in the countryside. The applicant's supporting statement refers to the proposal complying with Category 2 infill sites of the policy. Regarding the proposed plot size, which extends to some 4,000 square metres, comparison is made with the house that lies to the east called Burnfield. This plot is viewed as being untypically large in comparison to the other curtilages and the character of the building group. It is noted that the 6 house plots at Broomhill ranged from 450 square metres to 1,700 square metres. The building group lies to the west and a single house to the east of the site. The proposal is viewed as joining the house to the building group, thereby creating a continuous line of 5 or more houses in a form of ribbon development, which would fail to comply with Category 1 building groups. It is noted that the statement does not claim support under Category 1. Regarding Category 2 infill sites, potentially up to 2 houses may be built in a gap. Support under this category is dependent on plot sizes, ratios and road frontages being similar to the building group. This criteria is not considered to have been met in this case. Due to the proximity of the site to the farm and the burn and the lack of an ecological survey, the land would need to be investigated for potential contamination, flood risk and habitats and species respectively, if planning permission was being granted. The access is considered to be acceptable, but any consent would need to be subject to a transport infrastructure contributions. In this case, there are no representations. There is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Colleagues, have you any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Braun.
Just one, I think, for Mr. Harrison. It's a sizable plot, as we've said, and obviously, if we were of a mind to approve the in principle decision, it opens the land for building. Obviously, it lays an in principle decision in. Can we condition that it can be only for one house? And if not, if it was to go to a planning application for more than one, for example, I presume our decision here today would be counted in.
Well, to take your last point first, yes, in the event of you deciding to grant planning permission, they would then automatically become, well, both two things, an approved consent, but even if it expired, it would become part of the planning history of the land. In answer to your question, of course, there would be nothing to prevent somebody making a subsequent planning application for more than one house. Mm-hmm. And I think, as I mentioned, the officer made reference to the guidance which said that if it had been recognised as an infill site, clearly, if planning permission was already in place, there would be a fairly, if an applicant would be making an application in the context of that recognition, and also that your policy does allow for up to 2 houses to complete a gap where an infill site is accepted.
Right. Okay, fine. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Councillor Illingworth, have you any questions for officers on this one?
I have no questions. Thank you. Thank you,
Councillor. I have a couple, I think, Mr. Harrison. I'm looking at page 249, which I realise is sort of indicative sizes and so forth, but it shows to me quite clear that the proposed site, with the exception of the house Broomhill, has a much bigger area of ground attached to it than anything else that I can see in the Broomhill area, shall we say, in the Broomhill group of buildings. Is that correct?
Generally, with the possible exception of the house that we saw in the early part of the photographs, currently under construction, but certainly all the other properties would appear to have considerably smaller plot sizes, and What I don't know, for example, if you're just looking at page 249, as I mentioned in the photographs, the plot identified as number 7, for example, that appears to include the paddock, and whether that is or is not the curtilage of the dwelling house is maybe uncertain, whereas the one next door to number 6, Dramerne, it hasn't included the space between Dramerne and the public road. If you're just looking at plot sizes, so I'm not quite, I'm not absolutely sure to what extent they do reflect it. But the main one I think I've already drawn to your attention is number 2, identified the conversion at the northern side of the application site, which implies really a very considerable curtilage, but on the ground it's part of a field, and the original planning application wasn't on that basis.
Right, so on that point then, Mr. Harrison, again on page 249, where it shows the number 2, am I right in thinking that the part of the field that does not form part of the garden ground of the former sheep wash building, is that that's simply a field, is it?
Yes, if we were able to go back in the photographs, and then that would probably illustrate that to you. It appears to be simply being used as part of the field. Further back, I'm afraid it's that one. No, sorry, going forward, you can see that the extent of the field and that photograph and the previous photograph.
Right.
It's just.
But there's no question of that part being subject to any planning application.
Well, I don't know. The original planning application for the conversion and extension of the building had a much smaller area of ground than what's shown as the garden ground on page 249. It more or less coincides with what you see in the photograph. If we can go back maybe one photograph. You see the timber fence there?
Yeah.
I haven't actually gone and measured it, but that's more in the order of the garden ground, which obviously goes beyond this a bit, rather than extending across the field to the burn.
Right, okay. Would it be possible to go back to a photograph that shows the site from the road? Could we go back a bit further? A
bit further, yeah.
I think there was another one just.
Yeah. One more. That's the main.
Right, so that's the one I'm looking for. Yeah. So the building in the background is the old sheep wash building.
Yes.
Yes. So am I right in thinking then, although there is a boundary on the as you look this way on the left-hand side of the Broomhill house or farmhouse garden ground, there's the burn and the associated fencing on the other side, but at the back it's simply a line of land recently planted Lowlandii trees. That's the only boundary there, is it?
Yes.
Nothing to the front apart from the post and rail fence.
No, that's correct. Yes.
Right. Okie doke. Right, that's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Nothing else from yourselves, colleagues? No, right. So, members, can we proceed to make a preliminary decision? So, can we determine this application for review on the basis of information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Braun.
I'm fine to proceed, Convener.
Councillor Illingworth?
I'm happy to proceed.
Right. And I too am happy to proceed. So we will now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Braun, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth Ross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. It's always a thing with these cases where we're dealing with infill sites or building groups that there are always two sides to the story. My inclination on this case is to allow the appeal My slight concern is, as we've asked the questions on, is that in laying down the in principle here, that there could be 2 properties built on it. It is my intention to allow the appeal on the basis that there be 1 property built. I know we can't condition that, but in fact it will be in the site history that was the intention. I think is perhaps enough at this stage. So my thoughts are to allow the appeal, subject to all the usual conditions, the contamination of the land, for example, transport, the design and style of the property, etc. So we would normally put in for an in-principle decision, but as I say, I'm happy, I think, on this occasion to allow the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view?
Yeah, I too am happy to allow the appeal. There is across Perth and Kinross and the whole of the United Kingdom, in fact, a shortage of housing, and this looks to be a suitable site for a house. And I'm happy to agree with Councillor Braun's suggestion that it's limited to just 1 house.
Well, in terms of democracy, my view may not hold much weight now, colleagues, but I have to say I would disagree with you. I feel that as I look at the reasons for refusal, I can't see this complies with any of the 6 reasons given there. I feel it's too late to go back to how Burnfield got permission, obviously, because the house is there. But I feel it's a very grey area, building groups. And sometimes your view is that a site falls within it, but I'm very clear with this one, this site falls out with that group. But democracy will always prevail, and the decision by 2 to 1, Mr. Harris and Mr. Fogg, is that we allow this application with some provisos. So perhaps, Councillor Braun, you may need to articulate further, but we'll see what Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fogg say.
Well, the issues, if I can put it that way, which I anticipate would need to be part of a planning consent, would include some of the points that Councillor Braun has already raised. Transport infrastructure contribution would be needed as a condition. The contamination of land assessment would need to be part of it. There was reference to the need for an ecological survey of some form. Flood risk was also mentioned. There was some uncertainty about that. The usual conditions you'd expect in relation to the provision of an access to the site. There's of course only a field access at the moment, and I assume there would be a question of some sort of SUDS provision for surface water drainage.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. You articulated that very well. Thank you very much. But that would be what I was thinking. Yes, the usual conditions we would have with an in-principle decision.
Right, so you're quite happy, Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fogg, you have everything you require for this decision.
Thank you.
Yes. Quite happy. So the applicant will not be delighted with this outcome, but I would ask them to bear in mind Councillor Braun's comments about the provision of 1 house on this site. Thank you. We now move on, colleagues, to
Convener, is it possible?
Councillor Illingworth, sorry, on you go.
Is it possible to suggest a comfort break?
Yes, indeed. You've read my mind. But before we move to item 4, we should have a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back rearing to go. So we'll be back at 14 minutes past 12, colleagues. Thank you. All right, Councillor Braun, are you back with us?
I am indeed, convener, so my internet's wavering a bit at the moment, so I've got the camera off, but I'm here.
Right, well, with that reassurance, we can continue, I think, if everyone else is here. Just don't waver too much, Bob. So we now move, having refreshed and raising to go, we now move on to item 4, which is erection of a dwelling house in principle, land 120 metres northwest of Prinns Smithy, Glenfarg. Can I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce this application for review, if you've finished your biscuit?
Thank you, convener. As you say, this is a planning application in principle for the erection of a dwelling house at land 120 metres northwest of Prinns Smithy, Glenfarg. The site extends to some 0.17 hectares of rough ground. A group of 3 houses lie to the south and fields lie to the north and west. The site abuts the A912 at its northmost cornered. I'll just take you through some photographs now, but you might like to have page 355 available by the location plan and site plan. The general sequence of the photographs will be approaching the site from the existing house to the north, approaching the existing houses as from the south, and then the development site and the adjacent countryside. So we can move to the first photograph. Thank you. This is the house opposite the entry into the car park that serves Balvaird Castle. It's known as Old Fargie Cottage. So if we move slightly to the left in the next photograph, we'll pass the garden ground associated with the cottage up the road to the frontage of the application site. And you can just see the trees which are in the corner of the application site, the narrowest tapering part of the application site adjacent to the road there in the photograph. It's a group largely of, I think about 5 or 6 Sitka spruce and 1 or 2 other trees as well. But you can just make the outline of the gable of one of the houses from this. But if we go up the road a little bit more in the next photograph, we see that in a bit more detail. So these are the trees abutting the road, and beyond that you can see the gables of the 2 houses which are the main frontage of the development that's taken place recently. Excuse me. So from there, if we again go up the road slightly, we're just catching the corner of the application site, and you can see there's a fair difference in levels between the road at that point and the main part of the application site. Thank you. So we have the two properties fronting onto the road there, Milburn House and Cedar House. The actual difference in levels starts to grade down a little bit as the road climbs. So if we go to the next photograph and up the road a little bit more, you can see we've taken the entry to the development. We have Milburn House still set up above the road, but maybe not quite so much as the application site. And beyond that, shall we see the older traditional property, Prim Smithy. So from there, if we go up the road to Prim Smithy and look back down in the next photograph, you can see the main frontage of Prim Smithy. This is us looking in a northerly direction now, and you're picking up beyond the smithy the modern, recently completed houses, two houses there, and beyond that you're just in the, shall we say, effectively in the skyline from this position. We pick up the conifers we saw in the earlier photographs. So from there we're going to go back down the road, so you can see the development from this side as well. So in the next photograph you can see there's a fair gap, as it were, between the traditional property on the left-hand side of the photograph and the boundary and curtilage of the Milburn House in this instance as the most recent photo. Beg your pardon, the most recent building. If we move down the road in the next photograph a little bit, take us to the just a bit more of a close-up of the two properties fronting the road, Milburn House and Cedar House, still looking in a northerly direction. And you can see from this position the the house to the rear isn't particularly noticeable. If we go down the road a little bit further to the access in the next photograph, thank you, we look up the access and we take in the house which is identified as plot number 2, which is set back a bit from the road. So from there we travel up the access in the next photograph, so up the slope as it were, and we start to pick up the application site itself. And you'll see here that it looks to be an area of ground which has probably been used as the builder's compound during the construction of these houses recently. You can see from this position you're looking through the application site, as it were, towards the countryside beyond. So from that similar position on the access, if we swing slightly to the right, we look across the entry, and you'll see in the far distance, as it were, you'll see Old Vargie Cottage, which we saw in the first photograph, and some of its outbuildings. We're still catching the corner of the garden ground associated with Cedar House. From there, if we swing round again to the right in that photograph, from that photograph we catch the corner of Cedar House and catch the remainder of the application site, and it, shall we say, its slight dogleg to where it tapers down to where the trees are. So from that position we move into the application site, as well. We go forward in the next photograph. Thank you. We move up to the, as it were, the back of the application site. So this is us looking down the north boundary of the application site, indicated in red, picking up Old Vargie Cottage. We see the field in between, and we also see the trees at the furthest corner next to the road. Swinging round to the right of that photograph from the same position, we look down the main body of the application site, and we see Balvier Castle on the rising ground, say towards the east. The house we see here is Cedar House, and from there again, if we swing to the right in the next photograph, thank you, we've got Cedar House. We're looking back through the gap which the access comes through, and plot number 2. Swinging round to the right of that again, we're just catching the back of the extension on plot number 2, and you see there's a bit of a difference in levels here. Ground rises up towards the farmland, and even longer views towards the Lomond Hills. So we swing round to the right of that photograph, we look up the main farmland lying to the west, up to the farm buildings. As you can see, the land rises and is slightly undulating. And if we swing round to the right of that photograph again, going all the way round effectively, we're looking back to some of the farmland to the north and the outbuildings associated with Old Fargate Cottage. And swing around again to the right in that photograph. It takes us down the slope this time. You might have noticed in earlier photographs a small building, I think it's a water treatment plant room, set above the road. This lies within the application site, down adjacent to the trees. In fact, you can possibly just make out, looking north, just a corner of Balvere Castle. So from that general position close to the road, we turn round, as it were, and look up the application site in the next photograph. So we're catching the back of Cedar Cottage. Swinging round to the right of that, we look up the main body of the application site, up to where the previous photographs were taken, and the farmland beyond. And swinging round to the right of that photograph, we get the farmland beyond on that, towards that northwestern side. And moving on from that photograph, we move right round, and this is just to give you a clear view from the application site up to Balvere Castle itself. So if I can leave you with the last photograph, I think it is, just to leave you with a photograph of the main body of the application site. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the site is elevated above and screened from the public road by houses and trees. It is generally set below the surrounding landform. The land is seen as an untidy area left over from the development of the adjoining houses. It was part of the original development site. A post and wire fence defines the north and western boundaries. The indicative plan illustrates how a house could be accessed from the existing cul-de-sac and accommodated within the site. The development could be provided with a private water supply and an independent private sewage treatment system. Regarding the reasons for refusal, the site is viewed as having recognisable and defined boundaries formed by woodland and long-established fencing. The proposed house would be a natural and cohesive addition to the existing building group in a way that would contribute to, rather than detract from, the appearance of the area or the objectives of the Ochil Hills Special Landscape Area designation. While this is an in-principle application, a house in keeping with the existing houses and additional tree planting is envisaged. The trees next to the public road would be protected in perpetuity, while the main part of the site could accommodate a house and garden. If the site was not developed, it is considered that the building group would appear incomplete, resulting in an adverse impact on the character and appearance of the area. It is not considered that the house would have an adverse impact on the setting or status of Balvere Castle, a Category A listed building. Turning to the officer's report of handling. At the time of the report was prepared, the 3 adjoining houses were under construction. Therefore, the proposal was assessed as an extension to a building group. The site is defined by the public road on the east and the houses to the south. However, the site is undefined on the western and northern boundaries. The housing in the countryside policy only allows for extensions to a building group into readily defined sites. That is, land that is defined by existing topography, roads, or well-established existing landscape features, such as a watercourse or mature tree belt with a suitable setting. The site has been assessed as the site has been assessed as not meeting these requirements and is seen as contrary to Local Development Plan Policy 17 and the associated supplementary planning guidance. The expansion of the building groups also needs to protect the character and amenity of the area. The site is viewed as having an awkward shape in comparison to the existing house plots. The likely position of a house is not expected to sit comfortably in relation to the existing building group. As such, the proposal is not seen as respecting the existing building pattern. While the proposal is not expected to detract from the residential amenity of the adjoining houses, its anticipated positioning is expected to detract from the visual amenity of the area, contrary to Policy 1 placemaking. Balveard Castle, a category listed building and scheduled monument, is some 400 metres from the site. The proposal is not seen as impacting on it in terms of its cultural asset. The proposal does not raise any concerns regarding access, flooding, surface water disposal or drainage that could not be addressed by conditions if planning permission was being granted. In this case, there have been two representations raising concerns but not objections regarding the sufficiency of the private water supply, the capacity of the foul drainage system, and concerns regarding access. In this case, there is a request for a site visit, but there is no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed for that presentation, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers in this application for review? Councillor Braun?
None this time, thanks, Convener.
Councillor Illingworth?
Only the question that was asked in the previous application, if we allowed permission for one house, could two houses be applied for in a future application?
Well, the granting of planning permission does not preclude anybody from making a further application in the event of planning permission being granted. So, as with any development site, a further revised or different application could be made. Yes.
Mr. Harrison, I have a couple of questions relating to page 355. It would help if we have 355 before us, which shows the four houses, the three existing and the proposed one. And I just wonder, before you tell me we're looking at this application and not the previous one, it's really just to set it in context. Can I ask if the whole area proposed for development now was included in the original application? Do we know this?
Well, certainly the applicant makes that point that the whole area formed the application site for the previous proposal. Yes.
Right, and further, I'm always trying to see if I can find a question that you don't have the answer to, Mr. Harrison. I don't usually manage, but I'll try with this one. Do we have any information as to why there wasn't an application for 4 houses originally rather than 3? Which I think, on reflection, would have made everybody's life much easier. You know?
I really. Obviously, I have no involvement in the previous application, as you'd understand, but no, in short, I can't help you with that. I'm sorry.
Well, that's the first time in many years I've managed to get you. I'll make a note of that. Thank you. Right, that's enough questions on this one for me, I think. So I'm quite happy, if colleagues are, to move to make a preliminary decision. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Braun.
Happy to go ahead, Convener.
Right, as am I, colleagues, so we will assess the case and move to debate. Having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start things off, colleagues. I have to say I find this a particularly difficult one. I normally find when I make a site visit, or a visit to the site, should I say, that helps me decide. But I spent a long time yesterday in the freezing cold up this hill, scratching my head and trying to decide about this one, because I think it's very, very difficult when there are 3 houses there already. I studied the reasons for refusal carefully and looked at them in the first instance in relation to the 3 houses that are already there. And I found it very difficult to justify refusing this house on the basis of the reasons shown on page 337, when there are 3 very similar houses built in very similar conditions right next door. Now, I realise that just because something has been done in the past, it doesn't mean we should give it the nod through on this occasion. And normally, as colleagues will know, I'm very particular when it comes to housing in the countryside that everything complies. But whilst I would struggle to see how the 3 already consented houses comply with all our rules and regulations regarding houses in the countryside, I find on this occasion, and it is unusual for me, I would disagree with both the reasons for refusal. I think in terms of, they mention amenity and other things, all the horse is bolted as regards to all this because of the 3 houses that are there already. And on this occasion, unusually for me, I feel that another house won't make any difference to any of that. There's already an access built to it that's already there, and it is part of what was previously an application site. So I think on this occasion, we'll see what colleagues have to say. On this occasion, I'm minded to overturn the refusal and allow the development of this house with 1 or 2 conditions, which I'll articulate later. But I think it'd be best to hear from Councillor Illingworth first.
Thank you, Convener. I too I'm prepared to disagree with the officers in this case. As you say, there are already 3 buildings there of very similar build, and or we haven't seen the actual planning application yet, but there are already 3 houses there. And given the crying need for more homes and more houses in Perth and Kinross, I don't think we've got. I think we can uphold the appeal.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor. There was Councillor Braun. May we have your view?
Well, I think we're going to have a unanimous verdict here, because I agree with you, both of you, on this one. I think it's I struggle to find how the original site got approved, obviously, as you said, Convener, but I don't see the point now of turning this one down since there's 3 already there. It's an unusual shaped plot, I agree, but you know, it's going to be shielded from the road by existing trees. Its access is through the existing site, so there won't have to be another access on the road. I'm happy to approve this one. I think, Convener, I think it just makes up the site completely, and I don't really see any reason now to turn it down, given that there's 3 already in place. So I'm going to concur with both of you and agree that the appeal should be upheld on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Braun. So I think Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fogg, our view is quite clear here. I think I would have a couple of concerns to do with conditions you can help us with. Perhaps one was there was mention of retaining the trees. Can I ask how that would be conditioned? And also I note that there is the building for the wastewater treatment is at the very front of the site. Can I just confirm that would be used by this house as well? Or do we know? Sorry, do we have that information?
Right. If I maybe deal with the trees first, you of course, it would be open to you to have a condition which required tree protection. In this particular instance, it would seem to be relatively straightforward, just by simply closing off that end of the site from the actual development area. The only issue which may arise is if it's necessary to take any services through the area affected, which might affect root systems. But some system whereby part of the site is closed off during the development process would seem to be appropriate. However, the applicant has volunteered that the trees would be retained in perpetuity once they fall within the garden ground. Of course, it's quite possible that they may need to have either a certain amount of arboricultural work done to them at some point, or may even need to be replaced at some point. So the associated issue you may want to consider is whether or not, especially looking at the photograph here, whether or not any additional, should we say, reinforcement of the screening of the site by planting of hedges or trees on the boundary might be appropriate in this instance, as trees in any circumstances don't necessarily last forever. The other issue you mentioned is the plant house. I understand that's a plant house which serves existing houses. I think some of the existing residents have expressed some concern about that. I understand that the water supply is gained from the wee burn, which is slightly below this. Whether the plant house has the capacity for this further property, to be quite candid, I really just don't know. And it is, I think, largely a civil matter for the people undertaking the development and the people with an interest in it at the moment to sort out between themselves.
Yeah, I think always very wise. Have nothing to do with private water supplies or sewage arrangements. Is always the best plan.
The only thing is you may wish to have a condition to make it clear that because the plant house lies within the application site, that that is recognised and respected by the development. But it would appear to be a civil matter largely between the owner of the site and the people who enjoy access to and services from that plant house.
Yes, and it's just, I mean, my concern, I think, as it's looking ahead, is we don't want to grant consents to then lead to other areas of confusion and bother later on. But if we can, if you're happy, we can accommodate that. I think if colleagues agree, I think we can leave to you and Mr. Fogg the drafting of the permission, given that it's it would appear to me to be relatively straightforward with the proviso about the trees.
There is a need for, I understand, a primary education and transport infrastructure contributions as well.
Yeah, well, that's if we include all that, I'll be quite content. But I think we have no grounds to refuse, given the situation with the other three houses on this particular site. So, are you content? Do you have sufficient information, Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fogg? Here we are. Right. Thank you. Well, the applicant will be pleased with this result. Not only was it in your favour, but unusually for this group, it was unanimous. So we'll now move on to item 5, if we may, which is installation of solar panels to Coach House, Bank Street, Aberfeldy. Can I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. It's a detailed planning application for the installation of solar panels at the Coach House, Bank Street, Aberfeldy. The property is a traditional detached house within the Aberfeldy Conservation Area. The dwelling house is not a listed building. The proposal concerns the installation of 14 solar panels, 7 on each side of the east and west pitched roof slopes, respectively. The existing roof covering is a Scottish natural slate. The panels measure approximately 1 metre by 1.8 metres and will be aligned in 2 rows on each roof slope and set down some 0.5 metres below the ridge level. The degree of projection above the roof plane and the panel frame colour is at present unknown. So maybe just take you to the photographs now, but you might like to page 399, which will provide you details of the proposal. The general sequence of the photographs, as you'll see in this first photograph, is the library and office building, which is a listed building. Then the adjacent fire station and the site as seen from the Aberfeldy to Crieff Road, that's Crieff Road itself. And then close-ups of the building and its neighbours, and then the approach to the building and the building itself from the Pend from Bank Street. So I say in the first photograph here we have the former library and offices, the listed building that's referred to in the papers. This shall be is slightly uphill on Crieff Road from the application site. So the next photograph, we swing slightly towards the left. We have a somewhat contrasting building, which is the fire station. In between that and the more traditional buildings, which we move to the next photograph, which we catch the corner of the fire station, but obviously then moves into the main body of traditional buildings within the conservation area. And so we're looking from Crieff Road through to the roof, in this particular case, the west-facing slope of the application site, and the general position of the solar panels is indicated there. So those would all be visible from the public road, as it were. The adjoining building, Rosemount, is identified in the location plan, just for ease of reference. And so from there, if we swing slightly again towards the left, from the same position, we're still catching Rosemount on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side of the photograph. And this is us looking down to the crossroads with the traffic lights, basically in the centre of Aberfeldy, I'm sure you're familiar with. So from that position, we move into the site itself. We move around towards the right and into, shall we say, behind the fire station. This is the slope, the west-facing slope, that is, of the applicant's property. And from there, if we move on again a little bit into round the back of, as it were, the property, this is now the east-facing slope, and of course the other adjoining properties fronting onto Bank Street beyond that. And from there, from the same sort of position, if we move slightly towards the right, we pick the building adjacent to it, again served by the Pend from Bank Street. This is 27 and 29 Bank Street if you're looking at the location plan. And that will appear again in later photographs taken from the Pend. So from there we move on, as it were, in the next photograph to the Pend itself. So this is just coming in off Bank Street, and you see looking up through the Pend up towards the listed building that was in the first photographs. You're just beginning to catch the corner of the coach house beyond the wheelie bins, as it were, there. But we now go up the Pend in the next photograph, and you get shall we see, the coach house itself, and you're getting the tower of the back of the fire station, and beyond that the listed building. And then if we swing to the left, still in the Pend, as it were, we look across to number 29 Bank Street and the properties opposite that. So swinging round to the right of that photograph, from within the Pend again, we just get the full frontage of the coach house itself. So I'll leave you with that photograph. Turning in summary to the applicant's case, in setting the context for controlling development, the local development plan policies are seen as slightly behind what is needed to respond to the need to reduce the carbon footprint and improve energy conservation. It is anticipated that, through the review of the policies in the future, there will be a justification for developments of this nature, as this becomes an increasingly important material planning consideration. This proposal includes the prospective use of surplus energy for the charging of electric vehicles as an additional factor in support of the application. The house is only briefly visible from Crieff Road and is not visible from Bank Street. Consequently, the renewable energy benefits are seen as outweighing any visual harm to the Aberfeldy conservation area. The immediate neighbours, who will be most affected by the visual impact, are supportive of the proposal. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. In addition to the usual requirement that proposals are assessed against the provisions of the local development plan and other material planning considerations, it is necessary to give special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character and appearance of the Aberfeldy Conservation Area in determining this application. While the building does not occupy a prominent position in the streetscape, the west elevation is open to public view from Crieff Road. Solar panels are a modern feature. The panels would cover and obscure a significant area of this traditional Scots slate roof. While recognising the renewable energy conservation benefits of the panels, this is not assessed as outweighing the visual impact on this roof as a key building element of the property. The slate roof is a feature that contributes to the historic streetscape. In conclusion, the proposal is seen as failing to meet the requirement to preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area. Furthermore, the roof is visible in the setting of the former library, which is a Category B listed building, including the outbuilding to the rear. The solar panels are seen as having an adverse visual impact on the setting of the listed building. On a separate matter, it is noted that, regrettably, replacement windows have been installed about 6 years ago. These are seen as having a significant detrimental effect on the appearance of the building. In this case, there are no representations. There is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison, for that application. Before we come to questions, if colleagues will excuse me for one moment, I need to go and investigate a noise in the house. Be back in 1 second. My apologies, colleagues. That's all is well. It's enthusiastic works in the house next door. Colleagues, can I ask, do we have any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Braun.
No questions here, Convener.
Councillor Illingworth.
No questions, thank you.
I too have no questions on this one, Mr. Harrison. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Braun.
I'm fine to proceed, Convener.
Right, Councillor Illingworth.
I'm happy to proceed.
Yes, I too am happy to proceed. So we will now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Illingworth, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth North Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations to start us off? Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I'm happy to agree with the position of the officers. This is a conservation area and a very attractive house, and I think that the fitting of solar panels, which are a very modern device, would detract from the value of the conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. May we have your view, Councillor Braun?
Thank you, Convener. I'm going to have to go the other way, I'm afraid, on this. During the photographs that we had, I noticed double glazing, street lights, TV aerials, satellite dishes, all attached to buildings in the conservation area, plus a fire station which looks of an odd design, modern design, I suppose 70s design, including a training tower, all in the conservation area. Now, I'm willing to bet that if people walk through the streets of Aberfeldy, they don't notice TV aerials or satellite dishes at all. They are just part of the scenery now. Solar panels are important. We have a climate change situation, just as double glazing is. Most of these panels fit flush to the roof. They are almost always, as far as I'm aware, of dark colour, because you need a dark colour to absorb light. And this is only, you can only see it, I think, from one part as you walk past the fire station. So I don't think it's a problem at all. I think it's one of those things, once they're on, nobody will notice them. And I think you'll find that in time, more and more of these will be fitted, including the library building. So my thoughts on this one, to approve the appeal. I appreciate that it is a conservation area, but there are changes already taking place there. Modern amenities are already there. And I think this will just be placed on, and once they're on, nobody will even notice. So on this instance, I would approve the appeal.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Braun. On this occasion, I agree with some of the points that both colleagues are making, but I think on balance, it is a balance, this one. This is a conservation area, and I think that this application may be a little previous, in as much as the rules have not changed, they have not caught up with this. And I feel that, although I take Councillor Braun's point, when you're beside a fire station of, I think, limited architectural merit, I think you could say, and when there are lots of other contraventions, you can be forgiven for thinking that a further contravention won't make any difference. However, I think in the context of conservation areas, we have a duty to uphold and protect conservation areas. And I don't feel that the reason that you might not see it is really good enough on this occasion. It could be that regulation will catch up with requirements. I can see why they would want to have solar panels. I could see why they would want to be using them to charge electric vehicles. And I quite understand why they would want to make this application. But I feel that on this occasion, I would have to agree with the officers and agree with the reasons for refusal. So I think that's quite clear. Again, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Fogg, we've disagreed again, 2-1. We are going to move to refuse on this occasion, although we may have a degree of sympathy with the applicant for wishing to do this. So I don't know, Councillor Illingworth, if you wish to add anything else to the reasons for refusal.
Yep. Three on the second line of first reason for refusal. I'd like to change the line from affect the appearance to affect the appearance of the main publicly visible elevation of a significant building in the Aberfeldy conservation area. The rest of that sentence. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. And on the fourth line of the first reason, I'd like to end the sentence after architectural and historic quality and add due to the panels being on east and west facing roof planes.
I'm quite happy with that, Councillor Illingworth. Anything else?
Okay, and the third change I'd like to make is on paragraph 3. It says the proposal is contrary to Historic Scotland, and that should read Historic Environment Scotland. And on the third line of that paragraph, it should say, as the proposal would have a detrimental impact on the Aberfeldy conservation area, instead of just conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm happy with these tidying up aspects. Do you have everything that you require, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Fogg?
Yes, Convener, thank you.
Yes, you have it, right. Well, I realise the applicant, this will not be the answer they were looking for. They're doing it all for the right reasons, and I hope they may find an alternative way of addressing the climate change issues that we all face. So we now move on, colleagues, to the last item on today's agenda, item 6, which is the change of use from agricultural land to garden ground and equine use and the erection of stables and a storage building in retrospect at Kinfons Holdings, West Kinfons. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Yes, thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the change of use of agricultural land to garden ground and equine use and the erection of stables and storage buildings, partially in retrospect, at 11 Kinfons Holdings, West Kinfons, Perth. I'll just take you straight to the photographs now, but you might like to page 427 available, provide you with a location plan and site plan. So in the first photograph, this is the frontage of 11 Kinfons Holding. And you'll see the, shall we say, it's a single-storey property without buildings, and adjacent to it, as it were, on the western side, we have a single-storey house. Canoe Hill, of course, rises sharply behind it. And if we swing to the right in the next photograph, we're still catching that property, but we're also catching the adjoining property on the, shall we say, eastern side of 11 Kinfons Holding. That's the property which is, shall we say, the owner of the property has some concern about surface water drainage affecting it. Moving from there, we go into the application site, as it were, just to give you a little more of the detail of the frontage of the applicant's house, and also, of course, this outbuilding, and as you'd probably expect, vehicles and trailers associated with the equestrian use. So from there, we go beyond this to the back of the house in the next photograph. Thank you. So this is looking to back down to where we've just been in the previous photographs. This is the rear of 11 Kinfons, and obviously taken from within the, should we say, the circulation area associated with the stable buildings, which you'll see in shortly in later photographs. But this is looking at the back of the property with an extension on it, and also the back of the ancillary building. From there, if we swing slightly to the right, from that same position, we're catching part of the stable block. And again, if we swing slightly to the right of that, we still see the main, we step back a little bit to get the whole stable block, as it were. And then swinging slightly to the right of that, we'll get the last part of the stable block where it starts to get into the field. So here we got the boundary with the equine use, as it were. So from there, the same sort of position, we're going to swing round towards the right in a sequence of photographs now. So stepping back a little bit, we see the entry into the field and then other property beyond the application site. And of course, land across, going across the fields towards the main road between Perth and Dundee, and then beyond that we've of course got the part of Canoe Hill horizon. So from there, swinging round to the right in the next photograph, we look across the main body of the paddock towards Canoe Hill. You can see the land is almost completely flat. Swinging round to the right of that. In the next photograph, see we're looking across more of the application, a substantial area of paddock involved in the application. And swinging round again to the right of that, we're looking towards the back of the property, and you may notice the property affected by surface water drainage, or a concern being expressed in that context. This is looking in an easterly direction, and to some extent in the foreground you can see water does tend to lie on the land, which is one of the reasons why the applicant explains that they have brought in a certain amount of loose material to raise the ground level associated with the stables. So from there, again, if we swing round to the right, in the next photograph, it takes us into background and into the area of proposed extension to the garden ground. So as you can see, we have the conservatory at the rear of the existing house with this garden ground and this generally shows the area which extends into what was part of a former paddock. Beyond that, the applicant is taken in as an extension to their garden ground. So we can move to the next photograph. This is us stepping back outside just to show the entry into the adjoining property. The property is referred to in the papers. And if I can leave you with the last photograph. I'll just leave you with a photograph of the stable block itself. Turning now in summary to the applicant's case, the grounds of appeal relate to three aspects. First, the change of use of agricultural land to garden ground. It is appreciated that this land is out with the settlement boundary and lies within the greenbelt. The extension of the garden to take in this strip seemed logical when the old decayed fence needed to be replaced and the fence already enclosing the paddock lay some 9 metres to the north. If necessary, the original fence line could be reinstated. Second, concerns the change of use of the agricultural land to an equestrian use. The applicant owns the land. The land has been grazed by sheep in most recent years. They were not aware that planning permission would be needed. The horses currently using the land are for their personal enjoyment. The land would continue to have the same planning status, being out with the settlement and in the greenbelt. The proposed equestrian land use is seen as an element that is independent of the stable building aspect of the proposal. The comments of the Council's flooding team are seen as indicating that there is no adverse impact from surface water arising from the change of use of the field. There are no plans or aspirations to form a horse riding or training arena. Any horse exercising or erection of horse jumps would take place within the fields. Any horse jumps would be positioned temporarily and removed when not in use. In conclusion, the change of use is seen as improving the local environment, something that the applicant has been doing for years by removing extensive amounts of rubble, scrap and hogweed from the land. Third, the siting of the stable block. The original intention to have portable shelters as part of the grazing regime has not proved to be workable because of the flooding of parts of the field. Also, the regular movement of the buildings and the associated feedstuffs and bedding using a tractor and quad bike was seen as a source of potential noise disturbance to neighbours. The foremost consideration was retaining the shelters close to the house to minimise the risk of willful injury to the horses by others. Unfortunately, the possible alternative position of the stables can be subject to flooding up to a depth of 1 metre. Ground raising would be expensive and expected to displace surface water onto other properties. The position chosen is on a slightly elevated area of land, partially sheltered by trees and sited where there was historically a building. The slight raising of the ground levels at this location, with free draining aggregate to avoid bedding becoming wet, is not seen as effective field drainage or the surface water regime. Regarding the Planning Officer's report, the proposal is seen as reflecting Policy 1 and 1B of TAY Plan regarding the past improvements that have been made to the land and the sequential approach to development where the stable building lies on the settlement boundary. This building is in keeping with the rural area and the landscape of the greenbelt, as illustrated by the photographs submitted by the applicant. It also reflects policy 1D of Tayplan in safeguarding the character of the Greenbelt due to its small size and the location on the site of a previous building. There is a history of equestrian activity in the locality. Waste generated is uplifted regularly by a local farmer. The applicant is happy to discuss this aspect with Environmental Health. Regarding the Planning Officer's assessment of local development plan policies, the proposal is seen as complying with Policy 6, Criteria D, as it does not adversely affect any European designation. The provision for horse riding and the erection of the stables as a rural building is seen as enhancing the Greenbelt in accordance with Policy 43, Parts D and E, respectively. Turning now in summary to the Officer's report of handling. The application site lies out with, but adjoining, the settlement boundary of West Kinfons. Local Development Plan Policy 6, Settlement Boundaries, states that, and I quote, development on sites that adjoin these settlement boundaries will only be permitted in certain circumstances, including supporting rural business and diversification, and the locational need in terms of siting. The change of use of agricultural land to form an extension to the applicant's garden is not seen as meeting this criterion, and therefore this aspect of the proposal is assessed as contrary to Policy 6. The site lies within the Perth Greenbelt, where Policy 43 requires that all new buildings have a direct relationship with the land use and are essential for agriculture, horticulture, or forestry. The criteria also allows for development that advances the Council's aims of improving public access to the countryside around Perth, including recreational, educational, and outdoor sports. The change of use from agriculture to equine purposes, other than for grazing horses for personal enjoyment, and the formation of a permanent stable building does not conform with any of the Policy 43 criteria. In this instance, the stable building that has been erected are assessed as detracting from the character and landscape setting of the settlement. There is a known flooding issue at West Kinfons. The Council's flood section has recorded significant runoff from the field, which damaged the garden ground of the adjoining house to the east. As there is a lack of information demonstrating that the development would not increase the level of flood risk, the proposal is being contrary to Local Development Plan Policy 52. It is recommended good practice that livestock should be housed at least 400 metres away and preferably downwind of residential areas. Despite its position, considering that the stable would accommodate 4 horses for personal use, Environmental Health consider that the potential noise, odour and vermin issues could be controlled through an effective odour and waste management plan. In this case, there have been 2 representations to the proposal, raising objections concerning flood risk and the effect on the neighbouring property from surface water, noise pollution from deliveries, environmental concerns, the proposal being also out of character with the area. In this instance, there is a request for a site visit, no request for a hearing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harris. So, colleagues, do we have any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Brock.
Just a quick question to Mr. Harrison. I mean, how many horses are actually on the field, did you see when you were there? I mean, there's what, 1, 2, 3, there's 4 stables there, 4 sort of horse boxes, whatever the technical term is for them, but how many horses are actually there?
I saw, shall we see, 2 horses and a Shetland pony was what right. I witnessed when I was there.
It just seems a substantial block for just a small number of horses to me, but that was my question anyway. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Illingworth, have you any questions for officers?
I have no questions, thank you.
I have one, possibly two, Mr. Harrison. I'm looking at page 428. And I just want some clarification as to the extent of does the green belt cover the entire area, or is there a border for the green belt around here? On this page.
On page 248, the green belt.
428, I think.
428, by front, yes. The green belt includes the whole area which has got, shall we say, a hatching around the edge. Right. Of the boundary defined there, so the slightly cross-hatched area at the back of holding number 11 house, which is the extension to the garden ground, lies within the green belt.
Right, right.
Effectively, that is the edge of the green belt.
Right, and I've been there and had a look the other day. In your view, is there any other site within the area in control of the applicant where these stables could have been sited?
I think the applicant makes reference to that on. I'll just see if I can get the appropriate. If you turn to page 439.
Yep.
You can see there's a reference there to possible alternative stable site and discounted there. So the applicant has considered the possibility of having it, shall we say, the building within the settlement boundary in that position, but you may remember that the earliest photographs showed this sort of, shall we say, fairly extensive area of lawn or garden ground.
Yeah.
So that's where that would be positioned. The applicant is also, as I understand it, moved effectively the stable block on, presumably on skids of some sort, to different locations within the larger area, which is envisaged, but the practicalities, if I can put it that way, of moving them around and the concern that just even the movement might be causing a certain amount of noise disturbance to neighbours, let alone what is involved in having to move buildings of this order by towing them on with the tractor, which you see in the photograph here, on ground which is, I think, soft for a lot of the time, if not affected by flooding. Obviously creates practical difficulties for the applicant, hence the move to have them in a fixed position on slightly raised land, which is free draining.
But are you saying then, therefore, that these buildings we can see in the photograph now are the fuel shelters mentioned on page 461, or that's a different building?
That I can't be 100% sure about. They may be sectional buildings which, as say, could be mounted on a number of skids to allow them to be moved. But they are obviously of a, shall we say, of a type. You have a central storage building, and then you have the four identical styles of stables. But obviously they'd be too big, I think, to be moved readily on skids unless they were broken up into independent buildings.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. That's all my questions, I think. So we can now move toward a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Braun.
Happy to proceed, convener.
Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed, convener.
As am I, colleagues. So I think we can now assess the case and move to debate. So can I ask you, Councillor Braun, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off? Councillor Braun.
Thanks, convener. I think the sight of horses grazing on a field, of course, is part of the countryside that we come to know and love. But in this instance, there seems to be far more involved here with the size of these this stable block, quite considerable, I think. And there is no denying that it is out with the settlement boundary, or just outside the boundary, but it's outside. And it is obviously contravening the policy of Greenbelt. So I think on this occasion, on balance, as always these things are, I would have to deny the application. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Braun. May we have your view, Councillor Illingworth?
Thank you, Convener. I'm going to disagree with the officers in this occasion. Whilst there is a slight derogation or erosion of the Greenbelt, the land in question beforehand was fairly deeply contaminated with scrap iron and fence, so I don't think that's significant. The change from agricultural to equine is not a significant difference in my opinion, and the land has been used before for horses. The neighbours' comments about flooding have some weight to them, but I think they can be relatively easily resolved with a fairly simple digging of a ditch. And as for the comments about noise from tractors and quad bikes, I think there's quite a lot of noise there already due to there being a large dual carriageway, a very noisy dual carriageway, and a motorway even a few hundred yards away. So in this case, I'm going to disagree with the officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Braun is correct. There's a very fine balance with this one, and I think certainly at some point central clarification from central government as to the difference between equine and agricultural use would be helpful, because I think that your average man in the street would not be able to tell the difference. However, I think we do have a duty to protect the Greenbelt on every occasion, and it's perhaps unfortunate that this application has come before us as in retrospect as well, because perhaps had things been dealt with differently, a different result could have been envisaged if it had not been put up first. So I think, although it is a fine balance on this occasion, I have to agree with Councillor Braun and to uphold the reasons for refusal on this occasion. I understand that you may want to add some bits and pieces to this, Councillor Braun, would you?
Yes, just really on the first two grounds of refusal. On reason one, just to clarify, when we talk about policy 6, I think if we could put perhaps in brackets afterwards settlement boundaries, so that we know that's what it refers to. In reason 2, after policy 43, in brackets again, Greenbelt. So again, we know what we're referring to. I'd like to add a bit more into that reason, if I may. On the second line, after 2019 in brackets, to put a comma and just add, as it fails to fulfil any of the development criteria which can be supported within the Perth Greenbelt. And then at the very end, just after settlement boundary, add the words, and erode the distinction between the Greenbelt and the settlement of Kinfauns. And reason 3 left as it is.
I certainly would be quite happy to agree with those small changes, Councillor Braun. So, Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fowle, do you have everything you require for this? Do, yeah. So as I say, to the applicant, I recognise this would not be the outcome that you would be looking for, but I hope you've heard what we've said. We've given it due consideration, and I'm sure there will be a solution out there for these issues. So that brings the meeting to a close. I thank you all for your attendance and see you all in 4 weeks' time. Thank you very much indeed.